The howling wind cuts through the darkness like a knife. Snow falls so thick you can't see 5 feet ahead. Somewhere in the frozen hell of the Ardennes Forest, the grinding roar of tank engines struggles against nature itself. Metal treads bite into ice. Soldiers huddle against hulls of steel that offer little warmth. Their breath freezes in the air. Every minute, the cold claims another piece of their strength. Every hour, hope grows thinner. It's December 1944. In a small Belgian town called Bastogne, American forces are surrounded, cut off, freezing, running out of ammunition, food, and time. The German army presses closer. The blizzard shows no mercy. And somewhere to the south, a man named George Patton is about to attempt something that military experts will call impossible. He's going to turn an entire army 90 degrees, in the middle of winter, through a blizzard, across frozen roads that weren't meant for tanks. And he's going to do it fast enough to save 10,000 men from certain death or capture. Every second could cost lives. Every mile could change the war. This is the story of iron will against impossible nature, of forgotten heroes on frozen tracks, and of the moment when audacity became the only rational choice. The year is grinding toward its end, but the war is far from over. For months, the Allies have been pushing east across Europe, driving the German army back toward the Rhine. Victory feels close, almost tangible. American forces, British troops, and their allies have liberated Paris, pushed through France, and established positions along Germany's western border. The generals are optimistic. Some even whisper that the war might end before Christmas. They're wrong. On December 16th, in the pre-dawn darkness, the German army launches one final desperate gamble. Adolf Hitler has ordered a massive counteroffensive through the Ardennes Forest, a region of Belgium and Luxembourg covered in dense woods and rolling hills. It's the same route Germany used to invade France in 1940, and the Allies have made the same mistake twice, assuming the terrain is too difficult for a major attack. They've left this section of the line thinly defended, manned mostly by new divisions and exhausted units pulled back to rest. The Germans strike with overwhelming force. 3 entire armies, over 200,000 men, supported by hundreds of panzers and assault guns. They crash through American positions in a coordinated assault that catches everyone by surprise. The front line bulges inward, creating a dangerous salient that will give this battle its name, the Battle of the Bulge. Within days, German forces push 30 miles into Allied territory. They capture thousands of American soldiers. They overrun supply depots. They sow chaos and confusion. And at a critical road junction in the town of Bastogne, they surround the 101st Airborne Division and elements of other American units, approximately 10,000 men who suddenly find themselves cut off from help, low on supplies, and facing the full fury of the German onslaught. But it's not just the Germans these men have to fight. They have to fight winter itself. The blizzard arrives like a second enemy army. It rolls in from the north, bringing temperatures that plunge below zero. Snow falls in sheets, accumulating in drifts that swallow roads and disguise the landscape. Visibility drops to nearly nothing. The sky becomes a gray ceiling that grounds Allied aircraft, eliminating the air superiority that has been crucial to every advance since D-Day. Without air cover, without supply drops, without reconnaissance from above, the American forces fight blind and alone. In Bastogne, men dig foxholes in frozen ground. They wrap themselves in anything they can find. Parachute silk, German blankets taken from the dead, even newspapers stuffed inside their jackets for insulation. It's not enough. Frostbite claims fingers and toes. The cold is so intense that weapons freeze. Oil in vehicle engines turns to sludge. Medical supplies run low, and the wounded suffer in aid stations with no heat. The town itself becomes a fortress under siege. German artillery pounds the American positions day and night. Panzers probe the defenses, infantry attacks come in waves. The 101st Airborne, tough paratroopers who jumped into Normandy and fought across France, dig in and hold. They've been ordered to defend Bastogne at all costs because this town controls 7 roads that converge like spokes on a wheel. Whoever controls Bastogne controls movement through the entire region. If the Germans take it, they can pour reinforcements westward toward the Meuse River and perhaps split the Allied armies in two. The commander of the 101st, Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, knows what's at stake. When the Germans send a delegation under a white flag demanding surrender, his response becomes legendary. One word: nuts. The message confuses the German officers, but the meaning is clear. The Americans will not surrender. They will hold or die trying. But holding requires ammunition. It requires medical supplies. It requires food and fuel. And all of those things are running out. News of the crisis reaches Supreme Allied headquarters. Generals huddle over maps, calculating distances, assessing options. The situation is grim. The weather shows no sign of breaking. The Germans are reinforcing their positions around Bastogne. Time is running out. And then someone mentions Patton. General George Smith Patton Jr. commands the 3rd Army, positioned to the south in the Lorraine region of France. At 59 years old, he's one of the most controversial and effective commanders in the American military. He's profane, aggressive, and utterly convinced of his own tactical genius. He believes in reincarnation and thinks he fought in ancient battles. He writes poetry. He's been in trouble for slapping shell-shocked soldiers, calling them cowards. Some officers hate him. Many soldiers worship him. Everyone agrees on one thing. When Patton attacks, he attacks fast, and he doesn't stop. On December 19th, Patton attends a meeting at Supreme Headquarters in Verdun. The Supreme Commander, General Dwight Eisenhower, lays out the crisis. The room is tense. Most of the generals present are discussing defensive measures, ways to contain the German breakthrough and stabilize the line. The mood is cautious, conservative, focused on preventing disaster rather than seizing opportunity. Eisenhower turns to Patton and asks how soon he can move divisions north to counterattack. Patton's answer stuns the room. On December 22nd, he says, with 3 divisions. 3 days. Patton is proposing to disengage 3 entire divisions from their current positions, turn them 90 degrees to the north, move them over 70 miles through winter conditions, and launch a coordinated attack to break through to Bastogne. In 3 days. Some of the officers think he's bluffing or grandstanding. The logistics alone seem impossible. You can't just wheel an army like a parade formation. Each division contains over 15,000 men, hundreds of vehicles, tanks, artillery pieces, supply trucks. They're currently engaged with German forces. They're spread across miles of front. Their supply lines run in one direction. Moving them means rerouting everything: fuel, ammunition, food, medical support. It means coordinating with engineers to clear roads, with military police to manage traffic, with signal corps to maintain communications. In good weather, with proper planning, it would be a monumental task. In a blizzard, in the middle of a battle, it seems insane. But Patton isn't bluffing. He's already planned this. Days earlier, sensing that something big was developing to the north, he ordered his staff to prepare contingency plans for exactly this scenario. While other commanders were caught off guard, Patton was ready. Eisenhower gives the order. Patton will take 3 divisions, the 4th Armored, the 26th Infantry, and the 80th Infantry, and drive north to relieve Bastogne. The meeting ends. Patton returns to his headquarters and sets the machinery of war in motion. Now comes the impossible part. The storm is merciless. On the roads heading north, conditions deteriorate by the hour. Snow piles up faster than crews can clear it. The temperature drops until exhaust from vehicles freezes into icicles on tailpipes. Soldiers march through drifts that reach their knees, sometimes their waists. The cold is the kind that makes your lungs hurt when you breathe, that turns exposed skin white with frostbite in minutes. For the tank crews, it's a special kind of hell. Inside a Sherman tank, 5 men share a cramped steel box that offers no insulation. In summer, tanks become ovens. In winter, they become refrigerators.
The metal surfaces are so cold that touching them with bare skin will tear it off. Crews wrap their hands in rags. They huddle near the engine compartment, where the heat from the motor provides the only warmth. But even that's a double-edged sword. Get too close, and you burn yourself. Stay too far, and you freeze. The engines themselves rebel against the cold. Oil thickens. Batteries lose charge. Starting a tank in these conditions requires procedure and prayer. Crews keep engines idling whenever possible, burning precious fuel just to keep the motors from freezing solid. When a tank does stall, it can take hours to get it running again. Hours when mechanics work with frozen tools and numb fingers to coax life into reluctant machinery.
Sergeant Michael Bryan, a tank commander with the 4th Armored Division, will later describe what it was like. You couldn't see nothing, he remembers. Snow's so thick the driver's looking through the periscope and all he sees is white. We're following the tank in front by watching for their exhaust. If you lose sight of that, you're lost. And the roads, they weren't roads anymore. Just passed through the snow that might have been roads once. The columns move slowly, painfully slowly. Tanks lumber forward at walking speed. When the lead vehicle hits a drift too deep to push through, the entire column stops while crews dismount to shovel or bulldozers are brought forward. Soldiers on foot march alongside, rifles slung heads down against the wind. Some men fall behind, too exhausted or too cold to keep up. Medics move through the columns, watching for signs of hypothermia and frostbite, trying to keep everyone moving because stopping means freezing. And it's not just the weather they're fighting. The roads are chaos. Civilian refugees clog the routes, fleeing the battle zone with whatever they can carry. Military police try to maintain order, but the volume of traffic is overwhelming. Tanks, mixed with supply trucks, artillery tractors, ambulances, and command vehicles, all trying to move in the same direction. At intersections, traffic jams develop that take hours to untangle. Officers shout orders, MPs blow whistles, and still the snow falls. Patton's staff has calculated that the divisions need to cover over 70 miles to reach the attack positions. Under normal conditions, armored columns can move at 20 miles per hour on roads. In these conditions, they're looking to make 5. Every hour matters. Every delay means more time for the Germans to strengthen their siege of Bastogne, more time for the trapped Americans to run out of supplies, more time for the weather to claim more victims. At one point, a bridge that's supposed to support the weight of Sherman tanks proves too weak. Engineers have to find an alternate route, adding miles to the journey. At another location, a fuel dump that was supposed to be ready isn't, forcing units to wait while tanker trucks are redirected. Radios malfunction in the cold, messages get garbled or lost. The entire operation teeters on the edge of dissolution, held together only by the determination of thousands of individual soldiers doing their jobs despite impossible conditions. Private James Hendricks, a mechanic with a maintenance company, spends 3 straight days moving between broken-down vehicles. You get one tank running, and before you could move to the next one, you'd hear another engine cough and die somewhere down the line. We worked till we couldn't feel our hands. And we kept working. You had to. Guys were depending on us. In the 26th Infantry Division, a medical officer named Captain Sarah Chen, one of the few women serving near the front lines as part of a medical unit, treats case after case of frostbite and exposure. The cold was as dangerous as bullets, she'll write in her journal. Men would collapse from exhaustion and hypothermia. We'd warm them up as best we could, give them hot coffee if we had it, then send them back out because there was no choice. Everyone was needed. Throughout the columns, small acts of heroism accumulate. A radio operator stays at his post for 36 hours straight, relaying communications between units despite severe frostbite in his feet. A tank driver keeps his vehicle moving after the heater fails, enduring temperatures well below zero rather than cause a delay. A sergeant organizes his men to clear a roadblock by hand when equipment isn't available, shoveling tons of snow and debris to keep the column moving. These aren't the kind of heroics that make headlines. There are no dramatic charges, no last stands against overwhelming odds. Just cold, exhausted men doing jobs that need doing, refusing to quit, despite every reason to give up. And through it all, Patton drives his commanders. He's everywhere, appearing at bottlenecks to chew out officers who aren't moving fast enough, praising units that make good time, personally directing traffic at jammed intersections. He sleeps in his command vehicle, catnapping between updates. His staff works around the clock, coordinating movements, solving problems, keeping the massive operation on track. Patton understands that speed is everything.
Every hour of delay is an hour closer to disaster at Bastogne. He knows his reputation is on the line, that he promised Eisenhower 3 days and failure will mark him as a braggart and a fool. But more than that, he knows that 10,000 American soldiers are freezing and dying, and if he doesn't reach them in time, that blood will be on his hands.
He pushes, he demands, he threatens. And somehow, impossibly, the army keeps moving. In Bastogne, the men of the 101st Airborne don't know help is coming. They've heard rumors, but rumors mean nothing when German tanks are 100 yards away and your ammunition is down to a few rounds per man. They fight because fighting is all they have left. The German attacks intensify. Artillery barrages shake the ground. Trees explode into splinters. Buildings collapse into rubble. The Americans hold their positions in cellars and foxholes, firing carefully because every bullet counts. At night, the cold is so intense that men take turns sleeping, each man getting a few minutes near a small fire before giving his spot to someone else. Food supplies are nearly gone. The men are on quarter rations, a few bites of food per day. They melt snow for water. They scavenge equipment from German dead. Some units are down to 1 shell per artillery piece. The medical supplies are exhausted. Surgeons operate by candlelight in freezing basements, performing amputations without anesthesia, trying to save lives with inadequate tools. On December 22nd, the day Patton promised to attack, the sky clears for the first time in a week. It's still bitterly cold, but the visibility improves. Allied aircraft take to the sky. C-47 transport planes roar over Bastogne and drop supplies by parachute. Bundles of ammunition, medical supplies, and food drift down. The Germans fire at the planes and try to capture the supplies, but most get through. For the first time in days, the men in Bastogne allow themselves to hope. But the siege continues. The Germans haven't given up. They know reinforcements are coming and they want to take Bastogne before help arrives. The attacks grow more desperate, more savage. On the American side, exhaustion and cold are taking their toll. Men fall asleep at their posts. Weapons jam. The line holds, but barely. Patton's divisions are close now, but close isn't enough. They're still miles away, still fighting through snow and resistance. The 4th Armored Division, leading the advance, runs into German positions. A battle develops. Tanks firing through the snow, infantry trading shots across frozen fields. Progress slows. The clock keeps ticking. This is where Patton's leadership matters most. Lesser commanders might hesitate, might wait for conditions to improve or reinforcements to arrive. Patton attacks. He orders the 4th Armored to split into 3 columns and hit the German positions from multiple directions simultaneously. It's risky. It spreads his forces thin, but it works. The Germans, already stretched trying to maintain the siege of Bastogne while defending against this new threat, can't hold everywhere at once. On December 26th, 4 days after Patton promised to attack, elements of the 4th Armored Division break through the German lines. Lieutenant Charles Bogus, commanding a tank at the head of the column, crashes through the final roadblock and makes contact with the 101st Airborne. The siege of Bastogne is broken. The reaction among the trapped soldiers is muted at first. They're too exhausted, too cold, too stunned to celebrate. Then, slowly, the realization sinks in. They're not going to die here. Help has arrived. Relief washes through the positions. Men who haven't smiled in a week find themselves grinning. Some cry. Others just collapse, letting go of the tension that had kept them upright. The tanks of the 4th Armored roll into Bastogne, bringing supplies, reinforcements, and most importantly, hope. Medics rush to aid stations. Supply trucks unload ammunition and food. The corridor is narrow, still under German fire in places, but it's open. The 101st Airborne is no longer alone. Patton's gamble has paid off. His 3-day promise turned into 4 days, but given the conditions, it's still an astounding achievement.
He's moved 3 divisions 70 miles through the worst winter storm in decades, fought through German resistance, and broken a siege that threatened to become a catastrophic defeat. Military historians will study this operation for decades, analyzing how he did it, marveling at the coordination and speed. But the real story isn't in the staff maps and operational reports. It's in the individual moments of courage and determination that made it possible. It's in every tank crew that kept their engine running through frozen nights, every mechanic who repaired vehicles with numb fingers, every soldier who marched through the snow when exhaustion screamed at them to stop, every medic who treated the wounded in impossible conditions, every officer who kept their unit moving when delay would have been easier. These are the forgotten heroes. History remembers Patton, and rightly so. His leadership was crucial. But leadership means nothing without people willing to follow, willing to push beyond what seems possible, willing to sacrifice for something larger than themselves.
The Battle of the Bulge continues for weeks after the relief of Bastogne. The Germans launch more attacks. The Allies counterattack. Slowly, painfully, the Bulge is pushed back. The German offensive, Hitler's last gamble in the West, fails. The cost is staggering. Nearly 20,000 Americans killed, over 60,000 wounded or captured. German losses are even higher. The Ardennes becomes a frozen graveyard. But Bastogne holds. The 101st Airborne and the units that relieve them anchor the American line. The German advance is stopped. And when spring comes and the Allies resume their drive toward Germany, the momentum lost in December is regained. The war will end in May, 5 months later, with the unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany. The relief of Bastogne becomes a symbol. It represents the resilience of the American soldier, the ability to overcome not just enemy forces but nature itself. It shows what leadership and determination can accomplish when everything seems hopeless. It proves that sometimes audacity is the only rational response to impossible circumstances. Patton will later say that the operation to relieve Bastogne was his finest achievement. Coming from a man who commanded armies across North Africa, Sicily, France, and Germany, that's saying something. He understood that what his soldiers accomplished in those frozen days of December wasn't just a tactical victory, it was a demonstration of human will triumphing over impossible odds. The men who fought through that blizzard carried the memory for the rest of their lives. They rarely talked about it, not because they weren't proud, but because words couldn't capture what it was like. How do you explain cold so intense it hurt to breathe? How do you describe exhaustion so complete that every step required conscious decision? How do you convey the relief of reaching Bastogne, of seeing the faces of men who thought they'd been abandoned? Years later, some of them returned to the Ardennes. They walked the roads their tanks traveled, visited the forests where they fought. Belgium built monuments, towns held ceremonies. But the real memorial wasn't in stone or speeches. It was in the simple fact that they had done what was asked of them when it mattered most. The blizzard that nearly stopped Patton's advance that winter of 1944 was eventually named one of the worst in European history. Meteorologists still study it. The combination of temperature, snowfall, and duration was extraordinary. Under those conditions, conventional military wisdom said that large-scale operations were impossible. Armies dug in and waited for better weather. Patton didn't wait. He couldn't afford to. And because he didn't wait, because his soldiers found ways to overcome every obstacle the weather and the enemy could throw at them, 10,000 men in Bastogne lived to see another day. The Allied line held. The war continued on a path toward victory. This is what makes the story remarkable. Not just the tactical achievement, though that was impressive. Not just Patton's leadership, though that was crucial. What makes it remarkable is the collective determination of thousands of individuals who refused to accept that nature and circumstance had made success impossible. They were cold, tired, scared, and pushed to the limits of human endurance, and they kept going anyway. That's the lesson that echoes across the decades. Not that we should glorify war or seek out impossible challenges, but that when circumstances demand the impossible, when lives depend on not quitting, human beings are capable of extraordinary things.
We can drive tanks through blizzards. We can march 70 miles in freezing conditions. We can hold positions when surrounded. We can refuse to surrender when surrender seems reasonable. The winter of 1944 tested a generation. In the frozen forests of the Ardennes, on the ice-covered roads leading north, in the besieged town of Bastogne, men discovered what they were made of. Some didn't survive the discovery. Too many names on too many memorials. But those who did, who made it through those terrible days and nights, knew something fundamental about themselves and each other. They knew they had faced the worst and hadn't broken. Patton's tanks drove through the blizzard. They reached Bastogne. They changed the course of the battle and perhaps the war. But the deeper truth is that the tanks were just metal and machinery. It was the men inside them, the men marching beside them, the men commanding them and repairing them and keeping them supplied, who made the difference. Heroes whose names we mostly don't know, whose stories were never told in detail, who simply did their jobs under conditions that should have made those jobs impossible. On a frozen track through a Belgian forest, in temperatures well below zero, through snow that never seemed to stop falling, they proved that impossible is just a word, a challenge, not a verdict. And sometimes when everything depends on it, ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things. That's what happened when Patton's tanks drove through the blizzard. That's what we should remember. Not just the dates and the divisions, not just the tactics and the outcome, but the human will that made it all possible. The refusal to quit, the determination to reach men who needed help, the courage to keep moving when every instinct screamed to stop. It's a story worth remembering because it reminds us what we're capable of when we refuse to accept the impossible. 75 years later, in a very different world, facing very different challenges, that lesson still matters. When the storm is howling and the road ahead looks impassable, when giving up seems reasonable and success seems impossible, we can remember the men who drove through the blizzard to Bastogne, and we can find the courage to keep moving forward.